You know, at its heart, the changes in Brooklyn right now, there are a lot of issues on the table, but the core issue is, of course, money. And it's not local money. This is very important to understand. This isn't sort of rich New Yorkers from the Upper East Side swooping into the outer borough to make it over. This is money coming from all corners of the globe, and not always individuals. Very often not individuals. It's entities, it's hedge funds, it's pension funds, it's groups from Scandinavia and Australia and China. And that is a really essential thing to understand, because what that basically means is we end up segregating the people who spend the most time in a neighborhood from the people who spend the most money in a neighborhood. So the people that are filling the buildings, that are working in them, that are living in them, they're in the neighborhoods. Those are their neighborhoods. The people who are bringing the most money to the neighborhoods, i.e. the landowners, they're all over the globe, and they're totally detached from those communities. And I think that's the most insidious part of development in Brooklyn right now. I think the focus for the people who are bringing the outside money to the neighborhoods in Brooklyn right now, their focus is money. So, you know, and this applies to all sectors of life, this applies to labor too. I mean, it's much easier to fire somebody when you're the executive in New York and the plant is in Missouri. So it's much easier to move tenants around, move tenants out of a building, move new tenants in, if you're not there, if you're not on the ground, and all you really care about are the rent rolls, or that's your primary consideration, the rent rolls. So if that's your primary consideration, if you're an investor in New York City, how much capital you can squeeze out of a building, if that's your primary concern, then you don't care who's in the building, it's whoever can bring the most money to the rent rolls. What that does is that totally ignores the existing composition of a neighborhood, that ignores the history of a neighborhood, that ignores the people that have been there propping up that neighborhood through decades of neglect and lack of services from the city. I've asked a lot of real estate agents, real estate lawyers, investors about what could make all of the money that's flowing into New York stop. And a lot of people have trouble, most people have trouble coming up with anything. Truly the only factor that people mention that could stop the tidal wave of money is, God forbid, another terrorist attack that could scare people off. Outside of such an unpredictable event, there really isn't something out there that could stop these market forces that's so easy to predict. And when you look at something like China and all of the financial problems that are hitting that economy right now, it actually helps to drive some more money to New York because people are looking for a safer place to park their money. I was talking to a developer who said he can always tell who his next sort of batch of clients are going to be, or next batch of investors rather, are going to be by following world events and looking where the most recent catastrophe is. So a while back, he was getting a lot of Greek money, a lot of Greek investors. And he said now he expects a lot of Chinese investors. They're looking for a safe place to park their money. So even unrest in other parts of the world actually, in some sort of twisted way, encourages more money coming into New York. Well, the mayor's focus on East New York as his first neighborhood to rezone has created lots of interest from developers. All the developers I talk about, all the developers I've connected with about this, investors I've talked to about this, it's sort of like a swarm of bees. You know, once the sort of policy starts to develop around the neighborhood, in this case zoning, it generates a lot of interest, and people sort of gather around the hearings and the procedures to see how it's going to play out and try to position themselves so that they can be in an optimal place to capitalize on the neighborhood once everything is set into motion. And people, investors and developers, really try as best they can to be predictive about these things, how they think it's going to go, what areas are going to be zoned for taller buildings or more opportunity to squeeze, again, more capital out of this lot or that lot. So the fact that the mayor has focused on East New York has brought all kinds of interests from the real estate industry. You know, I think there are two ways to think about gentrification and the changes coming to Brooklyn. One is on a policy level. We can talk about changes we can make to law and how we go about taxing property and investors to change things. And I think those are really good and important conversations to have. But there's also a way to think about this and talk about on a more interpersonal level. And as a resident of Brooklyn, as a citizen of New York City, that means first and foremost, knowing my neighbors, which is in some ways very un-New York. But the fact that I have only lived in the neighborhood that I live in, Flatbush, for a year and a half, means that I need to not only get to know my neighbors, but I need to spend a lot of time listening and learning about who was living in that house before me, what's been happening in that neighborhood for the people that have been there for 20, 30 years. What are the challenges they faced? What are the characteristics of the communities they build up? I moved into the neighborhood right before Thanksgiving, right before winter. And I mistook my block for a very quiet block. When spring rolled around again, I realized that all the retirees from the Caribbean were coming back and throwing parties. So you're even sort of getting that rhythm of what a year looks like in a place, just soaking in, and I think is very important. And just listening. A lot of people come into neighborhoods as a new arrival and with good intentions and ideas about how we can make this neighborhood better. And they just sort of throw those ideas at everyone that's been there for so long, and I think that's the inherent mistake. I think it's about listening and getting to know your neighbors first.